Scrappy, why don't we start off by telling everybody a little bit about where you were born and raised?
I was born in Kilgore, Texas, in a two-room shotgun oil field shack, born at home. Number 11 in the house that night. Probably wasn't a very welcome visitor. Raised in Kilgore, went to the public schools in Kilgore. Graduated from Kilgore High School in 1957.
You talked about the house you were born in. A lot of us that are in the law profession, our daddies are lawyers, but that certainly wasn't the case with you, was it?
Oh no, my daddy was a roustabout. Matter of fact, he was a roustabout, retired on his 80th birthday. I lost him 2 years ago. He was 95 when he died. He didn't want me to be a roustabout, let's put it that way. He was kind of proud of his son that turned into a lawyer.
Your mom?
My mother, my dad and mother both were raised in Oklahoma, in the Indian country.
In fact, you got some Cherokee lineage, I believe, don't you?
My mother was half Cherokee. I used to call her a full-blood half-breed. Her mother and her daddy were half Cherokee Indian. My mother and daddy married in Oklahoma. Daddy was 22, my mother was 15. And they moved to East Texas, followed the boom, daddy working in the oil field.
That'd be illegal today, wouldn't it?
It would get you in the penitentiary.
Yeah, I've heard you several times during the closing arguments when you're trying to personalize your client. When most of us resort to talking about walking in the shoes of the defendant, you use a little bit different phraseology.
Talk about my mama. Remind what my mama told me. Walk a mile in his moccasins.
You went through high school in Kilgore?
In Kilgore, graduated in 1957.
Do you recall when you first started having thoughts about being a lawyer?
Yeah, kids growing up, all of us have had dreams, and our kids have dreams. I guess my grandkids have dreams. And that's something that I considered, wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go to school, knew I wanted an education. My mother wanted one for me really bad. And, but my grandfather, my dad's father, died when he was 59, and my grandmother was 58. My dad moved her to Kilgore. And fairly quickly after that, so in 1952 or so, some Romeo persuaded her to get married, and it lasted about 3 weeks, and he was running off with everything but the kitchen sink, and she had to get out of it, and my mother carried her to see a lawyer. The first time I was ever in a lawyer's office. I was 12 or 13 years old. And what I can remember was that lawyer charged my grandmother $200 to get an annulment of that marriage. And when I left there, I thought, boy, that's what I want to do. If you can get $200 that easy.
A lot of money.
That was a ton of money.
You, after you got out of school in Kilgore, did you know that you were going to go to law school? Were those in your plans at that point?
Well, after that and during high school, I was interested in the practice of law and being a lawyer. I was raised in East Texas, which was a absolute lawyer haven. Gordon Welborn, Rex Houston, Franklin Jones Jr., Scotty Baldwin, Welby Parrish. Just the trial lawyers abounded there. Joe Tonnahill down in Jasper, Judge Arisman in Longview. So I had, as in high school, I had gone to all of those places to watch those lawyers try cases. The Florence brothers in Gilmer, watch them try cases. And when I was in high school, I, like lots of young men, young women too, I guess, I courted with the ministry for a couple of 3 years in high school. But by the time I graduated from high school, I was pretty sure what I wanted to do if I could figure a way to do it. So I went to law school ultimately.
You had told me that there was a particular event that you participated in where you decided, hey, you know, by golly, that's really what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a lawyer?
When I was a senior in high school, like all senior classes, they have a senior play. And of course, I was pretty much of a damn ham anyway all of my life. And so I was, of course, in the middle of that. And it was a play, the title of that play, and most educators are familiar with it. It's a play called The Night of January the 16th. It's an audience participation drama, and it's all courtroom. It's all courtroom. It's a trial, a murder trial, and after it's all over, the audience becomes the jury. And I represented the defendant in that case, and like as should be expected, the jury found for my defendant.
And you were hooked.
And I was hooked, and I've been hooked ever since.
You, when you went to college, where'd you go?
I left Kilgore. I had a real close friend, best friend growing up, named Jerry Covington. Jerry died several years ago, cancer victim, as so many of our friends and families. But I wanted to go to Baylor growing up. I was a Baptist, grew up in the Baptist church, preached in the Baptist church, so I naturally wanted to go to Baylor. I didn't get a scholarship offer to Baylor, so I was heartbroken, perturbed. And Jerry and I got in the library and got in the back of Webster's Intercollegiate College Dictionary, where they have a list of all the colleges, and we just picked out 20 or 25 and sent applications to them. And both of us got responses, telephone calls. And I mean, telephone call. I had to go to the neighbor's house to answer the telephone at that point in time. The telephone call inviting us to come up to that campus that spring. And we both went. We fell in love with a small college, DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana. Went to school there as a freshman. I played football as a freshman there.
You told me before that you both went up there, not by car or anything, but you sort of had a journey to get there.
When they called us, if I sat here and thought a minute, I'm getting old, but I can still remember the guy's name that called me if I sat and thought about it in a minute. They called us and they sent us a train ticket. And we rode the train from Kilgore, had to change trains in St. Louis, and rode the Wabash into Greencastle.
After you finished up at DePaul, where'd you go to law school?
I got hurt in spring practice my freshman year, and was kind of disheartened. Of course, that was 1958. I don't mean to be political, but by 1958, Eisenhower had just about put this country in the tub. I mean, you couldn't find a job. There was nothing to do. I ended up looking for a month that summer, finally found a job digging ditches. And I couldn't play football. I couldn't afford to go. And I went to Kilgore College.
Went back to junior college?
Went to junior college. Went to Kilgore College that year.
You met somebody there, though, didn't you?
That was probably the best decision I ever made in my life. I met my first wife, my children's mother, Edwina McKellar. Edwina and I got together in junior college. That summer, I was out of money again. She left Kilgore, went to East Texas State, which is now Texas A&M Commerce, but she went up there. And I went offshore, roughnecking that summer, and roughnecked from May until January. And in January, picked her up one afternoon at East Texas State at the dormitory, and she and I drove over to Hugo, Oklahoma, and we got married, left there and drove back through Kilgore to advise my family that I was now a married man, loaded up a U-Haul trailer and went to Austin. And
enrolled in school there?
Went to school at the University of Texas, graduated there.
And then law school?
Again, when I graduated from University of Texas, Edwina was pregnant with our first child. I couldn't figure a way that I could afford a child and further education, so I went to work in Dallas for the United States Department of Labor. looking for a place and a way to go to law school. Finally ended up finding a job in Washington, D.C., and transferred to Washington, D.C., and then spent 4 years in D.C., going to George Washington University Law School, went in the evenings, went nights, worked both for the Labor Department and on the Hill while I was there. Graduated there in 1966.
Also, I guess not only did you sort of fuel your passion for the law, but you also became involved in politics and political campaigns, and I guess that was the first time that you were drawn into those things, right?
Being at George Washington University and in Washington, D.C., and working on the Hill, I got acquainted with lots of particularly Texas politicians, became more of a Democrat than I'd ever been, and ultimately got well acquainted with Senator Yarborough, worked in his office at times. When we moved, finished law school, went back to Austin, was able to get a job that transferred me there and paid for it, so I could take the bar exam in Texas. Got extremely active then in Democratic politics while I was in Austin. Ultimately ended up working for Senator Yarborough. Ed Wendler and I ran his campaign in 1972 when he ran. After Benson had beat him in 1970, he ran again in 72. Ed Wendler and I ran that campaign unsuccessfully. Barefoot Sanders beat him in the runoff.
How did you? Let me start over with that. How'd you begin your legal career after you got out of law school?
When I finished, I took the bar, and when I finished the bar in 1967, I went to work for Welby Parish in Gilmer. Of course, my home was Kilgore, and Edwin's home was Diana.
Got you back to your East Texas.
Yeah, right into East Texas in the roots. I went to work for Welby, who was one of the premier trial lawyers, and still probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life, because even though he was cantankerous and tough and belligerent, you learned from him, and I learned from him. I tell people from time to time, I spent 13 months with Welby, and I held the record for a long time. Nobody stayed with him that long. I couldn't tolerate it that long. But I left there in 1968, went to, in the middle of a campaign, the Humphrey Muskie campaign, went back to Washington working in that campaign, and again, we weren't very successful. I ended up stuck in Washington for a year. I worked for Office of Economic Opportunity. It turned into turned into the Labor Department while I was there. I was working in the Job Corps program. Left there when I finally found a way to get back. Left there and went back to Austin. I practiced law in Austin a while, and then went to work for the State Bar of Texas.
In what capacity there?
As Gene Cavins was the head of the continuing legal education, and he hired me to get involved. They were starting a CLE program called Skills Courses, which were basically basic CLE for young lawyers. And John Mixon, a professor at the University of Houston, was involved in it, and John and I put that together, and I ran it all over the state. I mean, ran seminars in every burg in Texas for a year. And it was that time when I got involved with Senator Yarborough in that campaign. I left the state bar and went with Senator Yarborough.
When you were doing those things for the state bar, that was pre-TCDLA formation.
Yes, that was 1970 and early 71. Matter of fact, 1971, when TCDLA was organized, it was at the State Bar Convention, and I was employed by the State Bar during that time doing these things, and was at that at that TCDLA meeting in Dallas.
You had told me before about the old state bar meetings and the criminal defense bar and the prosecutors would meet before the beginning of the bar convention. Is that right?
Of course, I became familiar with that when I was working for Welby. I mean, Welby went to that. I doubt Welby practiced law for years and years before he died several years ago, and I don't know that he ever attended a state bar convention, but he did go to what was called the Pre-Convention Institute. For years, the state bar begins on a Thursday, and runs Thursday, Friday, Saturday. For years, there was a Pre-Convention Institute which was on Wednesdays, and it was always run by the criminal bar. I think the criminal justice section of the state bar sponsored it. One year the prosecutors would put it on, the next year the defense lawyers put it on. But it got to where there were more people attended the Pre-Convention Institute than attended the bar convention. And so the criminal law section made a lot of money every year doing that. Didn't have many projects then in the criminal law section, so the money was used almost entirely for a hospitality suite that started on Tuesday night before the Pre-Convention Institute and ended Sunday afternoon if the whiskey didn't run out before then.
And you'd find lawyers in various states.
You could find them drunk at 8 o'clock in the morning, passed out in couches at night. Yeah, they partied hard.
What is your recollections of how TCDLA got started?
It was something that was, I think, probably Tony Freelow, Houston lawyer, Phil Burleson, Frank Maloney, Judge Maloney ultimately, they were Charlie Tesmer, Emmett Coven. They had some contact and activity in the National Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and they wanted to do something locally to get local lawyers, and so they talked about it, and they, when they would be at different functions and they'd have conversations, and it kind of got together to the point in 1971 that through communications they had agreed to meet during the bar convention and attempt to organize a criminal lawyers association, and they did. They met. The convention hotel that year was the Hilton Hotel, the old Hilton Hotel downtown Dallas. There was a bar there, I forget the name of it. It was off the lobby and ran down to that corner going, I guess that's west on or south on whichever way Main Street runs on Commerce. They had it in there. There were a bunch of people there. I don't know who all was there, and I'm not sure they even recorded it, but I can remember a lot of them that were there. A lot of them that ultimately became very active in the TCDLA. All of them you've ever heard of: Warren Race, Emmett Coven, Charles Tesmer, David Evans, George Luquette, Tony Freelow, Phil Burleson.
When they formed TCDLA, you couldn't be a charter member.
I was working for the state bar at the time, and you couldn't join those independent associations, so I didn't join. I was there, but then several months later, when I quit the state bar and went to work for Ralph Yarber, I joined TCDLA at that time. So
you became very active.
I tried to be.
Do you recall some of the lawyers from East Texas that were charter members of TCDLA?
As I said a while ago, East Texas is blessed with good lawyers when I was growing up, and while it's still, of course, a lot of those same good lawyers are still there. But in Henderson, you had Gordon Welber and Rex Houston, who were just superb trial lawyers. In Marshall, you had the Jones Baldwin firm, Franklin Jr., Franklin Sr., Scotty Baldwin. In Welby, in Gilmer. The Florences were in Gilmer, Judge Erisman in Longview, Weldon Holcomb over in Tyler, just lots of good lawyers. I think probably the charter members would have been Gordon and Rex, Gordon Welber and Rex Houston, both of whom made jillions of dollars in plaintiff's practice. They were just criminal lawyers because they like to take care of people when they need taken care of. Weldon, of course, was a charter member. Welby was a charter member. I believe, and Judge Arisman was a charter member from over there. There are bound to have been more because Ebb Mobley was practicing law in Longview there. I don't know that Ebb was a charter member, but if he wasn't, it was pretty close to that. Otis Hill might have been a charter member.
You were talking earlier about the formation of TCDLA, and do you remember the beginning goals that were discussed for the organization, the purposes?
You know, if I had a magazine, I could read to you exactly what was.
Textbook answer. Just what were the concerns and.
I think the basis for the organization of TCDLA was because of the experience that criminal practitioners had then, still have now from time to time, although TCDLA has improved it 10,000%. But when I started practicing law in the 60s, the criminal bar was kind of the stepchild of the bar. I mean, you didn't get a lot of invitations to the fancy parties where the rugs were. The rug lawyers, as I call them, looked down their nose pretty much at criminal practitioners. So, and I think that was an undergirding of the reason that TCDLA was pressed, because these lawyers knew what they were doing, and they knew the importance of what they were doing, and they wanted good lawyers to become involved in criminal defense work, and I think that was part of it, to kind of give a voice to the criminal bar, and I think it has.
You have received many accolades and awards through the years. What are some of the ways that you've been recognized for your work as a criminal defense lawyer? Obviously, you're in the Hall of Fame. We're inducted this year, Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Hall of Fame.
The issue of what recognition Scrappy Holmes might have had over the years is I guess it's interesting to somebody, but it reminds me of, there was a great criminal lawyer over in San Antonio named Jimmy Gillespie. Great criminal trial lawyer who had a real gruff voice, spoke like that. And I went in his office one time, and it was a big office. It was probably 20 or 24 by 20 or 24. It was a big office. And there wasn't a square inch on any wall that wasn't covered up. And he saw me looking at it, and he said, "What do you think of all that?" I said, "Well, that's impressive." And his response was, "Hell, it's just eyewash." And basically, I guess, that's pretty much the way I look at it. It's great to be recognized, but if you grew up around Fred Arisman and Welby Parrish and Franklin Jr. and Weldon Holcomb and the Florences, Percy Foreman, some of the people, Warren Burnett. I mean, it's just an honor just to have your name mentioned in the same paragraph. I've had the super lawyer deal. That I'm proud of that. I mean, it's I spent a lot of time in the courthouse, and you do that, you get your name in the paper a whole lot. And I've had those recognitions. I've had recognitions from TCDLA over the years. Things that I undertook with a friend of mine by the name of Dick Dromgoole, was one of my mentors. He was a career government employee, but one of the brightest, most literate men I've ever known. And he and I perceived that if some professional, literate person took an associational magazine. We could turn it from a weekly reader into a slick magazine. And that's The Voice. That's when that happened, how that happened. Dick Dromgoole did that. I got the recognition for it, but Dick Dromgoole did it. Here this summer, when they told me that, well, I think you told me that, first I heard of it, that I had been nominated to be in the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Hall of Fame. I'm sure you saw my reaction because I was stunned. I'm extremely proud of that recognition. But like Tim said when we had the induction, although I don't deserve it, I ain't gonna give it back.
You talk about being proud. I know it's one of the things that we talked about after you were recognized for your lifelong contributions. You told me that it meant so much to you because of the other people that are in there.
Exactly. When I don't know, it's like if you were a baseball player and they said you got to get in line with Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and Whitey Ford, Catfish, and the rest of them. When they say, Scrappy, now you get to stand in line with Warren Burnett, Percy Foreman, Jerry Goldstein, Tim Evans, Emmett Colvin. You get to stand in that same line, it makes you kind of proud. You're kind of proud that you got there.
You talked earlier about going to the courthouse and watching great lawyers as you were growing up.
Right.
Who are some of your, and I know we could talk, we've got an hour, that's kind of like a judge telling you got 15 minutes of summation on a 3-week trial. I know we've only got an hour, but who are some of the guys in the past that you were most impressed with that you saw in the courtroom, and why?
All those great lawyers that I've mentioned, both those that I was exposed to as a young teenager, kid growing up, and the ones that I've known and seen since I've practiced law. Some of them go from that beginning all the way through. Rex Houston, primarily a civil lawyer, but an absolute master at trial practice. He knew how to try a lawsuit. He knew how to talk to a jury. He knew how to handle a witness. He knew how to handle a judge. He knew how to handle himself. He just was one of those masters that had those skills. Welby Parrish was that way. Welby Parrish had his own methodology, but he was a winner. He won because he communicated and did it in his way. Of course, Warren Burnett, anybody that's ever been involved in a trial with Warren Burnett or watched him try a case, he has no peer. Going to all the ones you've ever heard of, Warren Burnett had no peer. He had that distinctive, literate, baritone voice, photographic memory, a student of human psychology, and he was a master, an absolute master. He could get you to give you money out of your pockets sitting in a bar. He's among the best. Now, of course, Warren's gone, Percy's gone. The newer ones, the ones that come around, Jerry Goldstein is an absolute master. Tim Evans is an absolute master. I've been involved with and seen them both in trial, tried cases with Jerry on several occasions. You look at some that you don't hear so much about. Emmett Colvin was a master. Only person I've ever known that could sing a final argument. Charlie Tessimer, best cross-examination guru ever was. Those are the ones, I suppose, that I kind of like to think about and talk about.
It's kind of funny you were talking about Burnett just a minute ago. You recently, or I guess we recently, had an opportunity to talk to a client about Warren Burnett. I think that our client, who's sort of up there in years, was relaying to us that if we were the lawyers that Warren Burnett was, that the case would get dismissed, and Warren this and Warren that, and I guess he didn't realize that you and Warren were friends and knew each other. How'd you respond to it?
David, you know that you and I represent a man. We won't use names. I think that'd probably not be proper, but we represent a man who's got an aggravated assault charge in Smith County. He'd been tried once, got convicted, and the jury gave him 10 years. He got lucky, and they granted a motion for new trial. He retained us to take care of him on the second go-around. He's an older gentleman. It's hard for me to say that about folks now, since I'm an older gentleman myself, but he's older than I am. Cantankerous, home originally in Odessa, and you will recall how difficult he has been for us to deal with. And among his difficulties has been his advising us almost daily that he was a personal friend of Warren Burnett, that he and Warren Burnett went back a long ways, and that he knew Warren Burnett and what he would do, and that if we would do what Warren Burnett would do, then he'd be all right. That if this Warren Burnett had this case, it'd get dismissed, or Warren Burnett do this and Warren Burnett do that. Of course, I think he probably was not aware that I've known Warren. I knew Warren Burnett for years and years. I was in court with Warren Burnett in several venues, and have been, started to say, I better clean this up. I have been in the cup with Warren Burnett on many occasions, and in the course of getting frustrated with his continually referring to what Warren Burnett would do, I advised him one day of my relationship with Warren Burnett, and I could tell him from my experience with Warren Burnett what Warren Burnett would do in this particular instance, and what Warren Burnett would do is tell you to shut the fuck up.
You want to take a break for a second?
Yeah, let me get a drink of water.
Okay. Talk about the cases that you're most proud to have been involved in.
And we're rolling.
Scrappy, and I know we could sit here till the sun comes up in the morning, but some of your most memorable cases, if you could tell us about those.
Of course, when you practice law 40 years, there are lots of cases that you try, and good Lord, I'd hate to try to remember cases I tried 40 years ago. I can remember the damn judges I tried them in front of, but there have been lots of ones that you remember.
Damned and judges don't always go together in a sentence, do they?
I thought there's a hyphenated word.
What are some of the most memorable ones?
There's, of course, the ones you wish you could remember are all the not guilties. Those are the ones, but that's not the way it works, because some of the most memorable cases you got your ass hammered, and like that Teedy case here in the last 8 or 9 years. deep freeze where he killed his friend and put her in the deep freeze for 9 months and spent all her money. That was a memorable case, I guess, because of the factual circumstances, but also because it was such an evidence of greed from every quarter. I mean, this woman had a lot of money, a lot of property, small town, Carthage, Texas. Her son was a doctor, a professional, out in the panhandle somewhere, and she was not only dead, she was in the deep freeze for 9 months, and nobody missed her. So the relationship that she had with her family at trial, when they tried to portray how they missed Grandma and all the tears, that was so much bullshit. If they'd missed her, after 6 months, you'd at least think that they'd say, "Hey, have you anybody heard from Granny?" But we started that case in Panola County and tried to pick a jury, could not pick a jury, could not get a jury selected.
One of the reasons was?
The reason they couldn't select a jury is because 75% of the panel couldn't send Bernie Teedy to prison.
Some of the money that he took from her, he was spreading.
Yeah, he did.
Everything.
Teedy had given money to the church. He had given money to the college. He had helped the needy, so to speak. He was a kind of a modern day Robin Hood. He was taking her money, but he was spreading it around. But besides that, he had a great reputation in town before that. He was kind of active in his church, lay preacher, sang in the choir, active in the community theater and community music.
Much requested at funerals to sing and be a part of people's funerals down there.
And he represented all the little old ladies because he worked for a funeral home, and all of the little old ladies in town, he kind of hand carried them around. And so that we could not select a jury, not because they wanted to hang him high, but because the jurors couldn't consider the maximum range of punishment. Ended up trying it in St. Augustine, and
you had told me y'all were getting some pretty good licks in as you went along.
When we tried the case, we were doing well. We were getting along. We were making it pretty good. But there was a video. There was a video where at the lab in Dallas, when they found her in the deep freeze, they sealed the deep freeze and got a generator on a trailer and plugged it back in and carried her in the deep freeze to the Southwest Laboratories in Dallas, and for an autopsy, of course. And they rolled that. There's a video where they roll. You see them rolling that deep freeze in on gurneys or rollers, and they open it up, and there's looks like a little miniature cherry picker, a little device with a little hoist on it, electric, comes up behind the lid, and you see them working, attaching something on this video. And when they get it all attached, the guys in white coats step back and straighten up, and the little lift pulls up Granny, frozen, with corn stuck on her cheek. It was hideous.
You'd seen the video?
I'd seen it before, so I didn't watch it, but the screen was turned to the jury. And and I knew when she popped out, I'd watched it before, and I was watching the jury. And when she was lifted up out of that deep freeze and popped into view, there were 12 jurors watching the screen, and as soon as she popped up, 12 heads went to the wall, and they never looked back. And we got life.
You talked about a while ago the great lawyers that you've had the opportunity to try cases with, and I know that one of your favorite memories is trying one with Jerry Goldstein.
Jerry Goldstein and I It's been years ago now, 15, 18 years ago, 1990. When I got Jerry involved, I had a couple of Smith County citizens came to me. They were twins, the Malden twins. Their daddy was a rather well-to-do logging contractor. They worked. It was a family affair, and they worked, and they were pretty well heeled, all of them. But they had been arrested and charged with 18 kilos of cocaine and $250,000 in cash, ultimately. And what came about as a result of this investigation, which included wiretaps, surveillance, the whole 9 yards. Arrested 2 mules, a contact man, a driver, and the twins. So they both came to see me. I told them it'd be a conflict, couldn't represent both of them, so I got Jerry involved. And Jerry and I worked on that case together, hours and days and weeks. Of course, Cynthia always there too. But we started trying to pick a jury in Smith County, where the case was filed. Tried twice. There were 287 veneer persons on the first panel that we busted. That panel, wasn't enough qualified jurors left to strike from. They came back 2 weeks later and did it again with 318. We busted that panel. So the judge, Bill Coates, sua sponte, transferred the case to Canton, Texas, Van Zant County, on his own motion. And you understand, every defendant in this case was black. Our clients were black twins, had been great, famous in East Texas, high school athletes, had both gone to school in Louisiana, played college ball. There were 2 folks that were deliverers or whatever, mules, that from California, they were black. There was another kind of a black contact guy that had been in contacts with the twins. Then there was a fellow from Dallas who was a driver. But that was the array of defendants, and we were transferred to Van Zant County, which at that time, the black population of Van Zant County was like 1.3%. And we...
which for East Texas is...
Small. It's a small percentage. Tyler's probably 12. So we went to the county with the fewest blacks, obviously. Jerry had not had those experiences in those rural areas, but it drug out so long. It took a week to get a jury selected up there, with fighting over the race issue all the time, primarily because I had told Jerry that I was raised, of course, in East Texas. Used to drive back and forth up Highway 80 going to Dallas, go through Grand Saline, and told him of the racist billboards that were on the highway going in and out of Grand Saline. I mean, with the N words, don't let the sun set on you here. Jerry, I told Jerry that, and he was absolutely incensed by it. So we decided how we'd do the voir dire. We decided to let Jerry close the voir dire. I'd open the voir dire, and Jerry would close it, since we were trying all these people together. And I agreed with Jerry that I wouldn't talk about the race factor. I'd leave that for him. And Jerry got up in that his part of the voir dire, and he found an appropriate spot. Found somebody from Grand Saline. Made sure that they were at least 50, 60 years old, so they were around, and then inquired about that. after he had already talked to everybody. Everybody's going to be fair. Everybody's not going to be any racial, leading them on. And that blew that panel apart. The judge finally gave them a recess. They came back in. The judge had instructed Jerry that he could not ask any more questions on race. Ultimately reversed the case on that issue.
He had a great laundry list at that point.
Yeah.
Of questions about with the fact that there was Confederate days.
Oh, Jerry had composed a list of other issues on the racial issue. For example, that there were Confederate flags on the court around the courthouse every day, the jury coming in and out. But when we came back, they shut Jerry down. Wouldn't let him talk about any more racial issues. And so Jerry was kind of trying to get his feet back on the ground of what to talk about. And a little lady on the front row had kind of just raised her hand. She'd been real quiet. She just raised her hand, barely raised her hand. Jerry didn't notice her. And I finally whispered, Jerry, hey, this lady's got a question. So he turned around and saw her. He said, well, yes, ma'am, can I help you? And she stood up and she said, yes. And he said, well, do you have a question? She said, no. He said, well, do you need to say something? She said, yes, sir. These folks out here aren't being honest with you.
This preacher's wife, wasn't it?
She turned out to be the Baptist preacher's wife, and she got to telling Jerry about the conversations that were going on in the hall during the breaks. We ended up getting a jury, but it was pretty sure after that whatever we did in that trial, we couldn't screw it up so bad that we weren't going to get to do it again because of Coates's rulings on the voir dire. Tried that case for 7.5 weeks. We rented office space there, but we were there so long. Living in a motel. I told people I stayed in Van Zandt County so much. That's Canton is where they have the trade day, the first Monday, and we spent 2 first Mondays there. And by the time we got to the second Monday, when I would try to get across the street back and forth from that little office we had to the courthouse, people had asked me for directions. Hell, I could tell them any place in town. I was like a native. That was an interesting case.
And I think on that one too, didn't Coates step off in it by making comments about the racist comments about your clients?
The denouement of that Malden trial was, and when we got pounded so much by the court, Jerry and I, my current wife, present wife, Laquita, lived in Austin. Of course, Jerry lived in San Antonio. And if we could get out of there on Friday afternoon, Jerry had a plane come over from San Antonio, land at that little strip in Van Zandt County, and we'd get on the plane, and he'd drop me off in Austin, and he'd go on to San Antonio, and then Sunday afternoon he'd come back by and pick me up, and we'd come back to Canton. But we came back one morning and had weather, one Monday morning, it was weather, and we were late, and we had the twins, who had I had a Suburban, they had my Suburban, and they met us out at the airport to pick us up because we always carried our stuff with us. And they helped us get it in the car, and we were trying to get in. We knew we were late. Well, we were late. The judge's office was at the back of the courtroom, and everybody gathered in there. And that morning, they were all gathered in there: the court reporter, the coordinator, the secretary, lawyers, prosecutors. They were all in the judge's office milling around. And when we pulled up to the street and jumped out, we were late, and I asked the twins to get those, if y'all help us get those bags, we need to get on back up there. And so Jerry and I just had, our small briefcases, ran on up to run in, and the twins got the bags full of all the other stuff and were bringing them in. And one of the lawyers that was representing one of the other defendants was there, Kurt Knoll, lawyer from Tyler. And the judge was standing at the window when the Malden twins came across the street carrying all those briefcases. And this was on the record. I mean, there was a record made of it and testimony had, so I'm using words that are in the record. The allegation was, and what the testimony was, that as Coates was the judge looking out the window, watching our clients come across the street, said in the presence of 12 or 15 people, "Wished I had a nigger to carry my bag." And when he said that, his coordinator just was appalled, said, "Judge, you know, we've had a week of jury selection with these racial issues." And his response to that was, "Oh, everybody ought to have at least one." That became a kind of a bell tone for that trial. That's the way we ended up trying it. Wasn't reversed on that issue. It was reversed on his disallowing further examination on the race issue.
One of the things that, in watching you, and a lesson to be drawn from that, I guess, for especially young lawyers, is when you and Goldstein learned about that. I mean, there was a full-blown, on-the-record expose of the judge and what he had said. Witnesses were called. I guess my point is that, are you scared of judges anytime in the courtroom?
You know, Bill Coates, who was the judge in that trial, was a friend of mine. I'd known him for years. And but we took him to task on it. He was wrong. He's old school. He probably didn't realize he was wrong or didn't care if he was wrong. But judges are just as subject to the rules as the lawyers are, and it's been my opinion and the way I handle my practice is that when they're wrong, they need to be told they're wrong. They need to be shown they're wrong, and kind of devil take the hindmost, not to be afraid of what they're going to do to you later on. I mean, you and other lawyers in Gregg County particularly know that for the last 26 years, I've butted my head against that wall.
Are there is there any other trial or any other moment that sticks out?
In 1983, Joel Berger, who with an NAACP Legal Defense Fund, called me December the 18th or 19th, right before Christmas, and asked me to get involved in a habeas involving a young man named Delma Banks. I didn't try the case, but he had been convicted, got the death penalty in Bowie County. His case had gone to the Supreme Court on an application for writ of certiorari, which was denied. He called me and told me that he had a death date of January the 4th, and that he needed habeas. And of course, my reaction was, where's the record? And the point was, it's always, death penalty litigation is always that way. And I knew there wasn't going to be a record, but we'd file some kind of a boilerplate and start trying to buy time. I didn't know that it was going to be as critical as it was, but we ended up filing a habeas. The judge denied our motions to withdraw the warrant, the death warrant, and gave us a hearing on the habeas on the 2nd. In those days, executions were performed right after midnight. So when you say it was set on the 4th, it was set at 12:01 a.m. on the 4th. So you didn't have but one day between the 2nd and the 3rd. Turned us down on the 2nd. We had a good Court of Criminal Appeals then, Judge Onion, Judge Houston, Judge Teague, the judges that you all know. My sister drove me to Austin the next day while I was working on a motion to stay. And I went to TCDLA office and got her to type it up for me that morning. Went and filed it. The judge granted, the Court of Criminal Appeals at 1:30 that afternoon granted the motion for stay. And then we embarked on, that case is still pending. This is 2007, that's 24 years. We went back and forth to the Court of Criminal Appeals with it, went back and forth to the Fifth Circuit with it, finally went to the Supreme Court 3 years ago. It'll be 3 years ago in December that argued that case in the Supreme Court. Delma Banks, Supreme Court ruled in our favor. Prosecutorial misconduct, reversed that case and sent it back for at least a new punishment trial and for the Fifth Circuit to decide further about whether or not we get a new trial on guilt or innocence. George Kendall, who is a magnificent appellate lawyer, largely responsible for all that, kind of leading us through the process. Delma's still alive. He's a lot older. He had twin boys that were born right after he was arrested on that capital case. I think one of them's in the penitentiary now. Delma's family was stuck by him. He's alive. We've got a trial. Someday we'll get a trial. But in terms of things you're proud of doing, I'm proud of doing that. He's still alive.
You talked about TCDLA in the early stages. You were involved from the very beginning, and I've heard you talk about the days when the board members would be told to show up at a board meeting, and instead of bringing a notepad or something, you told them to bring what?
TCDLA started out as I say in the country, scratching a broke ass. They were broke all the time. We were broke all the time. Never did have enough money. Went from Bill Reed, who was the first executive director, then Gary DeShazo was the executive director, and there were a couple in there in between. After DeShazo, I can't remember just exactly what order they came in. But it was several years before the $150 was paying the tab. What helped us along, we had the project, which is that grant that I had written while I was with the state bar, and then brought it to Tony Freelow, and Tony and I tried to get it for TCDLA and couldn't, ended up getting a joint grant, but TCDLA got the money, got to spend the money. The State Bar of Texas accounted for it, and that helped build TCDLA, because you was having those seminars everywhere. You could encourage people to join. But there were many board meetings, had them 4 times a year, sometimes special meetings. We'd have special meetings so you could bring a check. But you were pretty much expected, if you was on the board of directors, we had a board meeting, there would be a point in time during the board meeting that they'd pass the hat and you'd write a check and put it in there, which so you could pay the help next month.
In fact, at one point in time, you had to actually sign a note for the organization.
When we bought the building, when we bought that building on Natchez, where they were for so long, when we bought that building, Bob Jones, Charlie McDonald from Waco, I remember those two, me, I forget who all else, signed the note, co-signed the note with TCDLA to get the building built. So it's come a long way. It's come a long way.